Well, good evening, Club 17, and welcome to one more edition of Rotarian Spotlight. And obviously, we're getting closer and closer to meeting in the Hall of Mirrors. But I wanted to take a little bit of time to interview some members and get to know you a little bit better. So tonight, we are very pleased to have Barbara Dickerson with us tonight. So good evening, Barbara.
Good evening, President Dave. Good to be here with you.
Absolutely. I love your background. Thanks to the Ohio.
Cincinnati all the way.
There you go. Well, for those that don't know, Barbara is a relatively new member. I mean, you've been on board for a little over a year and a half almost. But she's made a really big impact, especially in the World Community Service Committee area so far. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that, I'm sure. But to get us started, so Barbara, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe something about your family, your career, your hobbies, interests, etc.
Okay. So originally from Milwaukee, born there in the early 50s, lived there till I was 13. Real privilege for most of us who move around in life. I lived around my extended family until I was 13. So grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, that was a big part of my life. I did most of high school in a suburb of Pittsburgh. My dad moved in the middle of my senior year, so I ended up graduating from school in a suburb of Buffalo, New York. And I moved to Columbus in 1972. This was after a rather disastrous teenage marriage, and I had no place to go except home. So I came to Columbus and ended up living there for a good long while. I worked at the university hospital on campus for over 10 years, did my degree, French and German with a minor in economics at Ohio State. Finished that up in 1985. Then I went to Germany for a year on a scholarship, had a very fun time with that. And then right around that time, my life was changing. I met and am now married to a former Peace Corps volunteer who was in Togo, West Africa. So we got married in 1990, coming up on our 30th wedding anniversary next week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We have two boys, Simon, who is 24, Max, who is 21. They are both adopted, both in countries that we lived in while we were overseas. Third culture kids, went to international schools. We insisted on them becoming pretty fluent in a foreign language, so they did a lot of schooling in French international schools, and both of them still speak French very fluently. And I'll be getting into the details about my foreign service career, but I retired from foreign service in 2018. And the plan for about 3 years before retirement was we were coming to Cincinnati. My husband, Don, is from here. I absolutely love the city, did my homework, found out what was going to be on offer. And I mean, so here we are. Part of my plan when I came in, one of them was joining Rotary Club. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the influences that came about with that. But I am not only doing Rotary Club in Cincinnati. I got involved with a church that runs a volunteer tutor program with kindergartners at the South Avondale Primary School. I'm just telling you, working with those kids, there's nothing like watching them like little flowers about January. You're working with them on phonetics, and all of a sudden they realize they can read. It's just the most amazing process imaginable. And I had to use French a lot in my international career, and I was just so set on keeping my fluency going. So, and I knew that there was an Alliance Française here in Cincinnati, so I got involved with them. I'm on their board. I moderate a weekly conversation group and having tons of fun with that because everybody is meeting by Zoom conference these days. So I'm pulling in friends from Africa. I pulled in about 3 or 4 weeks ago a retired foreign service friend who joined us from Japan and talked a little bit about his life in foreign service. It's fun.
Well, that sounds like a well-rounded trip to Cincinnati. So we're looking forward to hearing a little bit about your past as we go forward this afternoon. So I always like to do this, but tell us a little fun fact about Barbara that maybe no other Rotarian knows.
Oh, and I was so ready for you to ask this question. So, I told you I was born and spent a lot of my formative years in Milwaukee. And what does a girl with German ancestry in Milwaukee want to learn? Play the accordion. I haven't touched one for years, but I sort of know my way around it. But not something I share with a lot of people.
So when the Rotary Chorus commences again, maybe we could have you play the accordion. Is that Is that maybe?
No way, no
Oh,
way.
no way. Okay.
I haven't
I
touched
thought
an
I would try
accordion
anyway.
and yeah.
I know that in talking to you previously that you, and you mentioned tonight that you have, a history of international work experience that's extensive. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I told you I got pulled into doing international work. A lot of it had to do with the fact that my husband had been a Peace Corps volunteer. And he got pulled into international work. He worked on a graduate degree, got through the master's level, and he was starting to work on a doctorate, and he just realized that it was not going anywhere. So he ended up answering an ad in the newspaper and worked for several years for a USAID contractor. This is the agency I used to work with that does international development projects in public health. So we married in 1990. I was just finishing up my master's program then, and we went overseas, lived in Togo with him for 2 years. I was an English teacher at the American Cultural Center there. It was my first job. After that, we lived in Ghana for 5 years. That's where my oldest son, Simon, was born. And I got my first taste of doing development work there, working as a monitoring and evaluation specialist with USAID in their Ghana office. Really developed a taste for, doing this overseas work. It was fascinating. I learned a lot about development in general, but especially public health. After that, we did a 4-year stint in Kenya, which is where we adopted Max, my second boy. And I started doing some consulting work, doing some evaluations. I was also doing the mom circle thing, taking the boys to play dates and whatnot, because they were little shavers at the time. And one day I had been following Dawn's lead, and one day we just looked at each other and said, we've got to do something that's a little bit more permanent, make sure that the benefits are there, and we have some continuity going from place to place. So I applied for foreign service and got in. He closed out he was managing a project with the financing from UK aid agency. He closed that out, turned the responsibilities over to the chief of party who followed him. We go back to Washington for a year, and then I go out on my first foreign service assignment, which was Benin. We were there for 5 years. It's a francophone country on the west side of the continent. It's next to Nigeria. After that, we did Madagascar for 4 years. Absolutely lovely assignment. A little bit of turbulence. That was we had some street actions and an attempted coup. My family was evacuated while we were living there.
Wow.
That was quite an experience. Yeah. After Madagascar, we did Nigeria for 2 years. Also, things were getting kind of tense. A lot of Boko Haram bombings and whatnot, but the government did a pretty good job of keeping most of that out of the federal capital territory. We were in the capital city in Abuja. And about that time was when we started parting ways with the boys had been in French school. We had to start looking forward to college and whatnot. My oldest son ended up coming back to do boarding school on the East Coast for a couple of years, and my younger son was not far behind there. Then I had been a program officer in all of those other positions. That's all report writing, compliance, budgeting, etc. And I decided to throw my hat in for senior management jobs. So my next assignment was Liberia, 2013 to 2016. I was the deputy mission director there. And I arrived in 2013, 2014, beginning of the year was when the outbreak started. There was a huge CDC team that came in. So this is going on from February through the end of May. All of the measures were put in place to try to contain and do the contact tracing and everything else. And by the end of May, we thought, it's pretty much on the run right now. Well, we were wrong. It just kind of went underground. And by beginning of July, end of June, there started being cases that were turning up again. And so we just went on this roller coaster ride from basically the middle of July through the end of the calendar year. My boys were with us in the beginning. We had a major family vacation that was planned for a while. We left for a 2-week vacation at the beginning of August, but almost immediately after we went on that vacation, I was monitoring my emails, and I knew that they were going to tell the families they couldn't come back. And so I was working on the development side of programming, but of course, you had to bring in a response team, and my agency has a disaster response group that they send out to these emergencies. The first time that they had all worked in a public health emergency, it was kind of an all hands on deck experience. I just remember, everybody had their nose to the grindstone. You did your job, but I was listening to the ambassador who was on seat at the time talking about the fact that there was always a time early in that outbreak, especially that second wave, where you were scared because the disease was so deadly, and you had to kind of talk yourself down. Remember the science, because you had to have physical contact with somebody who was sick to really be at risk of getting sick. So now we're kind of in the middle of that same tension that you live with day to day, and your life is completely turned upside down. And it's taking me back to, those times and those days. I remember our staff, the local staff, just being incredibly stressed. Nobody knew what to do. The schools are closed. Their kids are at home. They're on lockdown while their parents are at work. I had one lady who was in tears in my office one day, her 16-year-old, who was just getting darn sick and tired of sitting at home all day. There was some commotion in the neighborhood that they lived, and he went outside to see what was going on, and she locked him up in quarantine for 2 weeks. She was so afraid he was going to get sick. It was quite an experience.
I would say it sounds like it's eerily similar to what we're going through at this point. I'm sure it was different, but there's probably a lot of similarities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you did join Rotary, and I'm glad you did. You bring a wealth of experience to our club, especially in the World Community Service arena. But you joined us, I guess, in February of 2019. So you've been on board a year and a half almost, and you really dove right in and got involved, especially in the World Community Service arena. And you were instrumental in helping write the global grant for the Madagascar Healthy Village Project. And I wondered that you had lived there until tonight too, which is really, really fun. Tell us a little bit about your Rotary experience so far and things that you've enjoyed doing along the way.
Well, I came prime for Rotary. So one of my supervisors when I was in foreign service, we actually worked with each other in 2 assignments. He supervised me when I was in Benin, and then he followed me out to Madagascar eventually. And he had been a lifelong Rotarian, had nothing but good things to say about it, and just said if I wanted to maintain that overseas connection, that was a good route to do it. And I have another friend who is also a Rotarian who strongly encouraged me to do it. And also, I'd been exposed to Rotary when I was living in Liberia. They actually asked me to come and speak at the investiture of the new officers. And so what I did was I just boned up on the history of Rotary and told the club what it was. Some of them didn't even know much about the history of Rotary. So I was ready. It was the service above self ethic is so much of what I've been about in my career path up until now. The Madagascar grant has been a lot of fun to work on. I have to give credit where credit is due. Ariel Miller did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of putting a lot of the grant together. And so when she asked me to come in and be the contact on behalf of the club, a lot of that was, doing some back and forth with the folks in Madagascar, nailing down details, trying to read the grant with the way someone who wasn't familiar with the grant details would read it. A little bit of translating back and forth. The people in Tamatave, it's the port city on the Indian Ocean, they're lovely. And when I came in, we were brought down to crossing T's and dotting I's, and chasing down a few approvals, which was quite an experience. But I just love working on it.
Well, Ariel gives you a lot of credit, and you give her a lot of credit. So great team working together to make it all happen. And obviously, our club is very, very proud to be able to conduct this great project. And certainly, I think a lot of your experience over the years that you described tonight certainly has led up to our ability to secure grants like that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in this world for us to tap into for other projects as well. So I've really, really enjoyed talking with you tonight, and I think there's no doubt in my mind that not only are you a leader in this community, but you're going to be a leader in our club as well going forward. So thanks so much for spending time with us tonight, and look forward to talking with you one-on-one sometime in the near future.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All
Good
right.
night.
Rotarians, until next time, please stay safe and healthy, and hopefully we'll see each other face to face here in the near future. Good night, everyone.
Good night.